The alarm clock screamed at 4 in the morning, just like it had every day for the past 12 years. Marcus Chen rolled out of bed, his body moving on its own. He did not need to think about it anymore. His feet found the cold floor, his hands reached for the same work clothes hanging on the chair. The smell of fish never really left these clothes, no matter how many times his wife washed them. Marcus walked to the small kitchen of their tiny apartment. The coffee maker was already set from the night before. He pressed the button and listened to it gurgle to life. Through the thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Rodriguez next door getting ready for her early shift at the hospital. The whole building was full of people who worked hard for little money, people who got up before the sun to make their living. He drank his coffee, black and bitter. There was no time for sugar or cream, no time for a real breakfast either. He grabbed a banana and stuffed it in his jacket pocket. In 20 minutes, he needed to be at the harbor. The fish trucks would arrive at 5, and someone had to be there to check the catch. That someone was always Marcus. The streets were empty except for a few other early workers. The bus driver, Jose, gave him a small wave. The newspaper delivery woman, Maria, nodded from across the street. These were his people, the ones who worked while the rest of the city slept. They did not judge him for the smell that followed him everywhere. They understood what it meant to work with your hands, to come home tired and sore, to count every dollar. The harbor was cold and dark when Marcus arrived. The ocean wind cut through his jacket, carrying the salt smell that mixed with everything else at the fish market. Big trucks were already backing up to the loading dock. Men in thick coats were shouting orders and moving boxes. Steam rose from their mouths in the cold air. This was Marcus's world now, and he knew every inch of it. "Marcus, get over here," shouted Tony, the dock supervisor. "We got 3 trucks coming in from the overnight boats. The restaurant orders are already backing up." Marcus jogged over to the first truck. Inside were hundreds of pounds of fresh fish packed in ice. Salmon, cod, halibut, snapper. His job was to check each batch, make sure the fish were fresh, sort them by type and size. His hands moved fast, feeling for the right texture, checking the eyes, smelling for any signs of spoilage. After 12 years, he could tell just by touching a fish if it was good to sell. The work was hard and cold. Ice water soaked through his gloves and made his fingers numb. Fish scales stuck to his arms and face. The smell got into his hair, his skin, his clothes. By noon, he would smell so strongly of fish that people on the street would turn their heads when he walked by. But Marcus was good at this job. Very good. He could spot bad fish from across the dock. He knew which restaurants wanted which cuts. He could lift 50-pound boxes all day without getting tired. The other workers respected him. The boat captains trusted him. The restaurant owners knew that if Marcus approved their order, the fish would be perfect. Around 7 in the morning, the retail customers started showing up. These were the regular people who came to buy fish for their families. Marcus always treated them well. He would explain which fish was the freshest, how to cook it, what to look for when buying fish at other places. Many of them came back week after week just to buy from Marcus. "Mr. Chen," said old Mrs. Patterson, "what do you recommend today?" "The salmon is beautiful today, Mrs. Patterson," Marcus replied, holding up a bright pink fillet. "Just came in this morning. Your husband will love it." Mrs. Patterson smiled. She had been coming to Marcus for 5 years. She never seemed to notice the smell, or if she did, she never mentioned it. "You always take such good care of us, Mr. Chen. Wrap up 2 pounds, please." This was the part of the job Marcus liked best, helping people choose good food for their families, seeing them happy with their purchase, knowing that his knowledge and care made their dinner better. It was honest work, and there was honor in doing it well. But as the day went on, other kinds of customers would arrive. People in expensive clothes who looked at Marcus like he was something dirty. Business people who held their breath when they talked to him. Teenagers who would point and laugh, making jokes about the smelly fish man. "Oh my God," he heard a young woman say to her friend. "I can't even breathe near that guy. How does he live with himself?" Her friend giggled. "Maybe he can't smell it anymore, like people who have too many cats." Marcus pretended not to hear. He had learned not to react to comments like these. Getting angry would not change anything. It would only make things worse. Instead, he focused on his work. He arranged the fish in neat rows, making sure everything looked perfect. He cleaned his workspace until it shined. He took pride in doing his job better than anyone else. During his lunch break, Marcus would sometimes walk to the small park near the harbor. He would sit on a bench and eat his sandwich, watching the boats come and go. The ocean was beautiful when the sun hit it just right. Seagulls flew overhead, calling to each other. It was peaceful here, away from the noise and smell of the market. Sometimes, while sitting in the park, Marcus would think about his old life. Before the fish market, before the 12-hour days, before the smell that never left him. He would think about clean hands and pressed clothes, about sitting in a practice room for hours working on difficult pieces until they were perfect, about the way music could make time stop, make everything else disappear. But those thoughts never lasted long. Sarah would be starting college in 2 years. The bills needed to be paid. The rent was due every month. His wife needed new shoes for work. These were the things that mattered now. Music was a luxury he could not afford. The afternoon shift was always the busiest. Restaurants sent their drivers to pick up orders. Caterers came looking for large quantities of specific fish. The pace was fast and demanding. Marcus moved between the ice bins, filling orders, answering questions, making sure everything was perfect. His back ached from bending over all day. His feet hurt from standing on concrete floors, but he never slowed down. "Marcus," called Jimmy, one of the younger workers, "can you check this batch of cod? Something doesn't look right to me." Marcus walked over and examined the fish. Jimmy was right. These cod were starting to turn. Not bad enough to be dangerous, but not fresh enough for Marcus's standards. "Pull these out," he told Jimmy. "We'll sell them for fish and chips. The restaurants won't take them." This was why the other workers came to Marcus with questions. He had an eye for quality that came from years of experience. He cared about doing things right, even when no one was watching, even when taking shortcuts would be easier. By closing time, Marcus was exhausted. His clothes were soaked with ice, water, and fish juice. His hands were red and raw from the cold. The smell clung to him so strongly that he could not escape it even when he tried. But the day's work was done, and done well. The register showed good sales. The customers had gotten fresh fish. The boats would come back tomorrow with another load. Marcus cleaned his workspace one last time, washing down the tables and organizing the tools. He said goodbye to the other workers and walked to the bus stop. The evening commuters gave him the same looks they always did, the same wrinkled noses, the same step backward when he got on the bus. He found an empty seat near the back and sat down, too tired to care what anyone thought. As the bus rolled through the city streets, Marcus stared out the window at the lights coming on in office buildings and restaurants. People in clean clothes were heading home to clean houses, to dinners that someone else had prepared, to evenings free from the smell of fish and the ache of physical labor. For just a moment, Marcus wondered what his life might have been like if he had made different choices. But only for a moment. Tomorrow would bring another early alarm, another day at the market, another step toward the future he was building for his family. Sarah's engagement party was still 2 weeks away, but the worry was already eating at Marcus. Every morning when he looked in the mirror, he saw the same weathered face, the same rough hands, the same man who smelled like fish, no matter how hard he scrubbed. How was he supposed to fit in with David's family? How was he supposed to pretend to be something he was not? The morning started like any other. 4 o'clock alarm, black coffee, banana in the pocket. But today felt different somehow. Marcus could not shake the feeling that something was about to change. Maybe it was just nerves about the party. Maybe it was the way Sarah had been acting lately, excited but also worried, like she was walking on thin ice. At the market, Tony had news that made everything worse. "Marcus, I need you to work the Williams wedding this Saturday," Tony said. "It's a big catering order, 500 people. They specifically asked for you to handle their fish selection." Marcus felt his heart sink. The Williams wedding was the same day as Sarah's engagement party. The same day he was supposed to clean up and pretend to be respectable. the same day he was supposed to make his daughter proud. "Tony, I can't work Saturday. My daughter's getting engaged. The party is." That night, Tony scratched his head. "Ah, man, that's tough, but this is a huge order, Marcus. The Williams family, they're big shots. If we mess this up, we could lose a lot of business. And they asked for you specifically. Said they heard you were the best." Marcus stared at the ice bins full of fresh fish. The Williams wedding would pay him double overtime. That money could go toward Sarah's college fund, toward the new suit he needed, toward 100 things the family needed. But it would also mean spending the whole day covered in fish, rushing home with barely enough time to shower and change. "How late do they need me?" Marcus asked. "The delivery is at 4. Setup is at 5. You could probably get out of there by 6 if everything goes smooth." The engagement party started at 7. It would be tight, but maybe he could make it work. Maybe he could shower off the fish smell and get dressed and still arrive on time. It would not be ideal, but the money was too good to pass up. "Okay," Marcus said. "I'll do it." Tony clapped him on the shoulder. "You're a good man, Marcus. The Williams people are going to love you." That evening, Marcus told Linda and Sarah about the wedding job. Sarah's face fell when she heard he would be working until 6 on the day of her party. "Dad, you can't show up to my engagement party smelling like fish," Sarah said. "David's parents will be there, all their friends. I can't—" She stopped herself, but Marcus heard what she could not say. She could not have her father embarrassing her in front of the people who mattered to her new life. "I'll have time to clean up," Marcus said. "I promise I'll be presentable." "It's not just about being clean, Dad," Sarah said, frustration creeping into her voice. "It's about fitting in. These people, they're different from us. They judge everything. The way you dress, the way you talk, the way you smell. I just want everything to be perfect." Linda reached over and squeezed Marcus's hand. "Maybe you could tell Tony you can't do the wedding job," she suggested gently. Marcus shook his head. "We need the money, Linda. Sarah's college loans won't pay themselves." "I can handle my own college loans, Dad," Sarah said. "I don't need you to sacrifice everything for me." But Marcus had been sacrificing for Sarah since the day she was born. It was what parents did. It was what his own father had done, working on the fishing boats until his hands were permanently stained and his back was bent. It was what Linda did, working double shifts at the factory so they could afford to live in a decent neighborhood. It was what families like theirs did to survive. The next morning at work, Marcus threw himself into his tasks with extra energy. He wanted to prove to Tony that choosing him for the Williams wedding was the right decision. He wanted to make sure every detail would be perfect, every fish would be exactly what the customer ordered. Around 10 o'clock, a woman in an expensive coat came to Marcus's counter. She was older, maybe 60, with perfectly styled gray hair and jewelry that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. She looked around the fish market like she was visiting a foreign country. "Excuse me," she said, holding a handkerchief near her nose. "I'm looking for Marcus Chen. I was told he's the best fishmonger here." "That's me," Marcus said, wiping his hands on his apron. "What can I help you with?" The woman stepped back slightly. Marcus was used to this reaction. "I'm Eleanor Wellington. I'm organizing the catering for my son David's engagement party. I believe your daughter works for the Morrison law firm." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. This was David's mother. This was the woman who would judge whether he was good enough for her son's family. And she was seeing him here, in his work clothes, surrounded by fish and ice and the smell that never left. "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "Sarah is my daughter." Mrs. Wellington looked him up and down, her expression unreadable. "I see. Well, I've heard you have an excellent reputation for quality fish. We're having a small reception, just 50 people, but we want everything to be perfect. David tells me your daughter has exquisite taste." Marcus tried to stand up straighter, tried to look professional despite his fish-stained apron. "What kind of fish were you thinking about?" "Something elegant, not too fishy. These are sophisticated palates we're dealing with." Mrs. Wellington's tone made it clear that she did not consider Marcus to have a sophisticated palate. Marcus walked her through the options. Fresh salmon, maybe some sea bass, Definitely some shrimp for cocktails. He explained how each fish should be prepared, what seasonings would work best, how to time the cooking so everything would be perfect. Despite herself, Mrs. Wellington seemed impressed by his knowledge. "You certainly know your fish," she admitted. "I've been doing this for 12 years, Marcus said. "I take pride in my work." Mrs. Wellington nodded and placed her order. As Marcus wrote up the details, she looked around the market again. "This is certainly authentic. David tells me you've been very supportive of his relationship with Sarah." "Sarah's happiness is the most important thing to me," Marcus said. "Of course. Well, I suppose we'll be seeing quite a bit of each other in the coming months. Sarah is a lovely girl, very ambitious. I'm sure she'll go far in life." There was something in Mrs. Wellington's tone that made Marcus uncomfortable. It was the way she said ambitious, like it was something Sarah had to be because of where she came from. Like Sarah had to work twice as hard to prove she belonged in David's world. After Mrs. Wellington left, Marcus felt uneasy. The encounter had been polite on the surface, but underneath he sensed judgment. He sensed a woman who was not thrilled about her son marrying into a family like his. A woman who would be watching him at the engagement party looking for reasons to disapprove. That evening, Marcus told Linda about meeting Mrs. Wellington. "She seems nice enough," Linda said, but her voice was doubtful. "What did she think of the market?" "She was polite," Marcus said, "but I could tell she was not comfortable. People like that, they're not used to places like the fish market. They're not used to people like us." Linda was quiet for a moment. "Maybe that's okay," she said finally. "Maybe it's good for people like that to see how hard-working people live. Maybe it will help her understand Sarah better." Marcus wanted to believe that, but he had his doubts. He had seen the way Mrs. Wellington held her handkerchief, the way she stepped back when he got too close. He had heard the way she said authentic like it was something quaint and slightly amusing. He was not optimistic about how the engagement party would go. The next few days dragged by slowly. Marcus found himself paying more attention to the comments people made about the smell, the teenagers who laughed when he walked past, the business, people who switched to mouth breathing when they came to his counter, the way people on the bus shifted away from him, even when the bus was crowded. He had learned to ignore these reactions years ago, but now they bothered him again. Now he was thinking about Sarah and David and Mrs. Wellington. Now he was remembering what it felt like to be judged for things beyond his control. On Thursday, Marcus went shopping for a new tie. The old one was stained and frayed, and even Linda's expert cleaning could not make it presentable for a fancy party. He walked through the department store feeling out of place, touching fabric that cost more than he made in a day. The salesman was young and well-dressed. He looked at Marcus with barely concealed distaste, probably wondering what a man who smelled like fish was doing in the formal wear section. "Can I help you?" the salesman asked, his tone suggesting he hoped the answer was no. "I need a tie," Marcus said simply. "For what occasion?" "My daughter's engagement party." The salesman relaxed slightly. At least Marcus had a legitimate reason to be there. He showed Marcus the cheapest ties, clearly assuming that was all he could afford. Marcus picked a simple blue one that would go with his old suit. It cost $40, which was more than Marcus usually spent on clothes in a year, but it was for Sarah. As he paid for the tie, Marcus caught his reflection in the store mirror. Even in his street clothes, even trying to look respectable, he still looked like what he was, a working man, a man whose hands showed the wear of hard labor, a man who would never quite fit in with people like the Wellingtons. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, with rain threatening in the dark clouds overhead. Marcus woke up even earlier than usual, his stomach tight with nerves. Today was the Williams' wedding job, and tonight was Sarah's engagement party. 12 hours to get through the biggest catering order of the year, then somehow transform himself into a father who would not embarrass his daughter. At the market, the Williams order was waiting. 500 pounds of premium fish, sorted and arranged according to the detailed list Mrs. Williams had provided. Salmon, halibut, sea bass, lobster, crab, and 3 different types of shrimp. It was the kind of order that could make or break the market's relationship with the city's wealthiest families. Marcus loaded everything into the refrigerated truck with extra care. Each piece of fish was wrapped perfectly, labeled clearly, and packed with exactly the right amount of ice. He had been preparing for this order all week, making sure every detail would be flawless. The Williams family was paying top dollar, and they expected perfection. The drive to the Grand Harbor Hotel took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Marcus had never been inside the hotel before, but he had driven past it many times. It was the most expensive hotel in the city, the kind of place where celebrities stayed and millionaires held their parties, the kind of place where Marcus would be attending his daughter's engagement party in 8 hours. The service entrance was in the back, down a narrow alley that most guests never saw. Marcus backed the truck up to the loading dock and started unloading. The hotel kitchen was massive, with gleaming steel surfaces and equipment that cost more than Marcus made in 5 years. Chefs in white coats moved around with military precision, preparing for multiple events happening that day. "You must be the fish guy," said the head chef, a thin man with tired eyes. "I'm Chef Morrison. Hope you brought good stuff because we've got some very picky people eating tonight." Marcus started unloading the fish, explaining each variety to the kitchen staff. The salmon was wild-caught Alaskan. The sea bass was flown in from the Mediterranean. The lobsters were still moving in their tank. Everything was exactly what Mrs. Williams had ordered, and more importantly, everything was perfect. "This is beautiful fish," Chef Morrison admitted, examining a piece of halibut. "Where do you source this stuff?" "I work with boats that fish the deep waters," Marcus explained. "The captains know what I'm looking for. They keep the best catch separate for my regular customers." For the next 3 hours, Marcus worked with the kitchen staff to prepare everything according to Mrs. Williams's specifications. He showed them how to cut the fish for the best presentation, how to check for freshness, how to store everything so it would still be perfect by evening. It was work he enjoyed, sharing his knowledge with people who appreciated quality. Around noon, Marcus realized he had a problem. The fish preparation was taking longer than expected, and Mrs. Williams kept adding last-minute changes to the order. She wanted the shrimp arranged differently. She wanted the salmon cut thinner. She wanted to add more lobster to the display. "I need everything to be absolutely perfect," Mrs. Williams said, sweeping into the kitchen in a cloud of expensive perfume. "This wedding is being featured in the society pages. Everyone who matters in this city will be here tonight." Marcus worked faster, his hands moving automatically through tasks he had done thousands of times. But every change Mrs. Williams made added more time to the job. The clock on the kitchen wall kept moving, bringing him closer to the moment when he would need to leave to get ready for Sarah's party. By 3 o'clock, Marcus was starting to panic. The fish display was still not finished. Mrs. Williams had changed her mind about the arrangement 3 more times. The kitchen staff was getting frustrated, and Marcus was caught in the middle, trying to make everyone happy while the minutes ticked away. "This is taking too long," said Chef Morrison. "We've got other events to prepare for." "Just give me another hour," Marcus said. "I'll have everything perfect." But even as he said it, Marcus knew he was in trouble. Another hour would make it. 5 o'clock. Add in the drive home and he would barely have time to shower, let alone make himself presentable for Sarah's party. The smell of fish was stronger than usual after working in the humid kitchen all day. It would take more than a quick shower to wash it off. Marcus tried calling Sarah to warn her he might be late, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She was probably getting her hair done or picking up her dress or doing one of the 100 things women did to prepare for important parties. Things that Marcus knew nothing about because his world was fish and ice and the constant battle against time and smell. At 4:30, Marcus was still at the hotel. Mrs. Williams had decided she wanted to rearrange the entire seafood display. The lobsters needed to be in the center, not on the sides. The shrimp needed more ice. The salmon needed to be fanned out differently. Every change was small, but together they were killing Marcus's chances of getting home in time. "Mrs. Williams," Marcus said carefully, "I need to leave soon for a family event. Is there anything else you need me to adjust?" Mrs. Williams looked at him like he had said something rude. "Young man, this is a very important wedding. I expect you to stay until everything is absolutely perfect. Surely your family event can wait a few more hours." Marcus felt trapped. This was his job, his livelihood. He could not afford to upset a customer like Mrs. Williams. But this was also his daughter's engagement party, the most important night of her life so far. The night when he was supposed to meet her future family and make a good impression. "Of course, Mrs. Williams," Marcus said quietly. "Whatever you need." By 5:15, the display was finally finished. The fish looked beautiful, arranged like pieces of art on beds of crushed ice. Mrs. Williams walked around it several times, checking every detail, before finally nodding her approval. "This will do," she said. "I suppose you do know your fish, even if you... well, never mind." Marcus did not ask what she meant by that. He did not want to know. He just wanted to get out of there and get home to his daughter. The drive home was a nightmare. Traffic was heavy because of weekend events. Construction had closed one of the main roads. Every red light felt like it lasted forever. Marcus kept checking the clock on his dashboard, watching the minutes disappear. 6:15. 6:30. 6:45. When he finally pulled into his apartment complex, it was 7 o'clock. The engagement party had already started. Sarah would be wondering where he was. David's family would be asking questions. Mrs. Wellington would probably be making comments about unreliable working-class people who could not even show up on time. Marcus ran up the stairs to his apartment, his work clothes still reeking of fish and kitchen grease. Linda was waiting for him with his suit laid out on the bed and a look of worry on her face. "Thank God you're here," she said. Sarah called 3 times. The party started an hour ago. Marcus stripped off his work clothes and jumped in the shower. He scrubbed with soap and shampoo and a brush, trying to remove 12 hours of fish smell. The water was as hot as he could stand it, turning his skin red, but still he could smell the fish. Still he could feel the oily residue on his hands and in his hair. Linda knocked on the bathroom door. "Marcus, you need to hurry." Sarah called. Again. David's grandparents just arrived. Marcus scrubbed harder, using dish soap now, anything that might cut through the fish oil. His skin was raw and burning, but the smell was still there. Fainter now, but still there. Anyone who got close to him would notice it. Anyone who shook his hand would smell fish. He got out of the shower and dried off quickly. Linda had ironed his suit and laid out his new tie. She had even polished his old dress shoes until they almost looked new. But when Marcus looked in the mirror, he still saw a fishmonger trying to play dress-up. "You look handsome," Linda said, adjusting his tie. "Sarah will be so proud." Marcus wanted to believe her, but he could see the worry in her eyes too. They both knew this was going to be difficult. They both knew he was walking into a world where he did not belong. The taxi ride to the Grand Harbor Hotel felt like a journey to another planet. Marcus sat in the back seat, trying not to touch anything, hoping the driver would not notice the smell. Through the windows, he watched the city change as they drove toward the wealthy district. The buildings got taller and cleaner. The cars got newer and more expensive. The people on the sidewalks looked different too, walking with the confidence that came from never worrying about money. When the taxi pulled up to the hotel, Marcus felt his courage starting to fail. The doorman was wearing a uniform that probably cost more than Marcus's suit. Valets were parking cars that cost more than Marcus made in 10 years. People in beautiful clothes were walking through the lobby like they owned the world. Marcus paid the taxi driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, gathering his courage. Somewhere inside that hotel, Sarah was waiting for him. His little girl, who had grown up eating fish stew and wearing second-hand clothes, was about to become part of a world that Marcus could barely imagine. He walked through the hotel doors, past the marble columns and crystal chandeliers, toward the ballroom where his daughter's new life was beginning. The ballroom at the Grand Harbor Hotel was more beautiful than anything Marcus had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks. The walls were covered in silk fabric that probably cost more per yard than Marcus, made in a week. Round tables were set with fine china and silver that gleamed under the soft lighting. Everything was perfect, elegant, and completely foreign to Marcus's world. He stood in the doorway for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight. There had to be 50 people in the room, all of them dressed like they had stepped out of a magazine. The men wore suits that fit perfectly, made from fabric that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle. The women wore dresses that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. Everyone looked comfortable, like they belonged in places like this. Marcus spotted Sarah across the room and his heart swelled with pride. She looked beautiful in a deep blue dress that brought out her eyes. Her hair was styled in a way he had never seen before, swept up and elegant. She was laughing at something David was saying, her face bright with happiness. This was how she deserved to look always. This was the life she deserved to have. David stood next to her, handsome in his perfect suit. He had his arm around Sarah's waist, and Marcus could see how much he loved her. That was what mattered most. Marcus did not care about money or fancy, hotels or any of the rest of it. He cared that his daughter had found someone who would make her happy. Sarah caught sight of him and waved, her smile even brighter. She said something to David, who turned and smiled in Marcus's direction. They started walking over, and Marcus felt his nervousness increase. This was the moment when Sarah would introduce him to all these important people. The moment when they would see what kind of family their golden boy was marrying into. "Dad," Sarah said, reaching him and giving him a careful hug. Careful not to mess up her hair or makeup, careful not to get too close to his clothes. I was starting to worry. How did the Williams wedding go? Everything went fine, Marcus said. Sorry I'm late. The customer wanted some last-minute changes. David shook Marcus's hand firmly. Mr. Chen, great to see you again. You look very sharp tonight. David was trying to be kind, but Marcus could see him notice the smell. Just a slight tightening around his eyes. A barely noticeable step backward. It was the same reaction Marcus got from everyone, but somehow it hurt more coming from his future son-in-law. Let me introduce you to some people, Sarah said, taking Marcus's arm. Everyone's excited to meet you. Marcus doubted that, but he followed Sarah into the crowd. The introductions began, and Marcus shook hands with lawyers and doctors and business owners. People with soft hands and expensive watches and names that sounded like they came from old money. Most of them were polite, but Marcus could see the questions in their eyes. What did a man like this do for work? Why did he smell so strange? How had David ended up with a girl from this kind of family? And this is my mother, David said, leading them to a small group near the windows. Mom, I'd like you to meet Sarah's father, Marcus Chen. Mrs. Wellington turned around and Marcus saw recognition flash in her eyes. She remembered him from the fish market. She remembered the smell and the work clothes and the ice-stained apron. For a moment, her composure slipped, and Marcus saw genuine surprise that the fishmonger from the market was here, in her son's engagement party, wearing a suit and claiming to be Sarah's father. Mr. Chen, she said slowly. What a surprise. Nice to see you again, Mrs. Wellington, Marcus replied. Thank you for having me in your home. This is the hotel ballroom, not my home, Mrs. Wellington corrected, her voice cooler now. And I had no idea you were Sarah's father when I met you at that establishment. The conversation around them quieted. Other guests were starting to listen, sensing tension in the air. Sarah looked confused, glancing between her father and Mrs. Wellington. You two have met? Sarah asked. Your father provided fish for a catering order this week, Mrs. Wellington said, making it sound like Marcus had done something vaguely embarrassing. I had no idea of the connection. Marcus felt heat rising in his face. The way Mrs. Wellington said connection made it sound like something shameful, like Sarah should be embarrassed to be his daughter, like honest work was something to hide from polite society. Dad owns the best fish counter at the harbor market, Sarah said proudly, but Marcus could hear the nervousness in her voice. He's been there for 12 years. Everyone in the city knows his reputation for quality. How industrious, Mrs. Wellington said, and somehow made it sound like an insult. The circle of guests around them had grown larger. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, their curiosity about this rough-looking man in the cheap suit who smelled faintly of fish. Some of them were probably recognizing the smell now, putting together the pieces of who he was and what he did for a living. "The fishing industry is very important to our local economy," said a man Marcus had not met yet. He was trying to be helpful, but his tone was the kind people used when they talked about interesting facts they had read in magazines. "I imagine it takes a lot of skill to know good fish from bad fish." "It does," Marcus said simply. 12 years of experience teaches you a lot." 12 years, repeated another guest, a woman with diamonds in her ears. "My goodness, and before that?" Marcus hesitated. This was dangerous territory. Before the fish market, he had been a music student. Before the fish market, he had dreamed of concert halls and recording contracts. Before the fish market, he had been someone these people might have understood and accepted. "I helped my father with his fishing business," Marcus said. It was not exactly a lie. He had helped his father, just not right away. Just not until after his dreams had died. Mrs. Wellington was watching him carefully, like she suspected there was more to the story. "And your wife? What does she do?" "Linda works at a textile factory," Marcus said. "She's been there 8 years." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Marcus could see the guests processing this information, filing him and his family into the category of working-class people. People who did necessary jobs but were not really part of polite society. People who worked with their hands and smelled like their work, and lived in small apartments in neighborhoods that people like this never visited. "How wonderful that Sarah was able to go to college," said the woman with diamonds. "Education is so important for upward mobility." Marcus wanted to tell her that Sarah had gotten a full scholarship because she was brilliant, not because she was trying to escape her family. He wanted to tell her that working with your hands was not something to escape from. He wanted to tell her that his job fed families and supported the local economy, and required skills that took years to learn. Instead, he just smiled and nodded. "Sarah is very smart," he said. "We're proud of her." "Of course you are," Mrs. Wellington said, and there was something in her tone that made Marcus's skin crawl. It was pity, mixed with disapproval. Pity for the fishmonger who was so proud of his daughter for rising above her circumstances. Disapproval that someone from his background was now connected to her family. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Marcus felt more and more out of place. The guests talked about their country clubs and their vacation homes and their children's private schools. They talked about stock portfolios and charity galas and restaurants that Marcus could never afford to visit. They lived in a different world, and they all knew it. Marcus excused himself and walked to the men's room. In the mirror, he could see what the other guests saw: a man whose hands were rough despite his best efforts to clean them. A man whose suit was obviously cheap and old. A man who carried the smell of his work like a badge he could not remove. He washed his hands again, scrubbing with the expensive soap, but it did not help. The smell was part of him now, worked into his skin over 12 years of handling fish. No amount of washing would make it go away completely. When Marcus returned to the party, he found Sarah talking with a group of David's college friends. They were all young professionals, the kind of people who worked in offices and made good money and never worried about the smell of their work following them home. Sarah fit in with them perfectly, laughing at their jokes and telling stories about her job at the law firm. "Dad," Sarah said when she saw him, "come meet David's friends from business school." Marcus shook hands with each of them, seeing the same reaction he always got. The polite smile that did not reach their eyes. The subtle step backward. The quick glance at their hand after shaking his, wondering if the smell would transfer. "Sarah, tells us you work in the fishing industry," said one of the young men. "That must be interesting work." "It has its challenges," Marcus replied. "I imagine the hours are difficult," said another. "Getting up so early, working in all kinds of weather." "You get used to it," Marcus said. The conversation felt forced, like everyone was trying to be polite while secretly wishing he would go away. Marcus could see Sarah watching him, hoping he would say the right things, hoping he would not embarrass her in front of these people who would be part of her new life. Then Mrs. Wellington appeared beside them, carrying a glass of champagne, and wearing the smile of someone who was about to cause trouble. Marcus stood perfectly still for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. The ballroom had grown quiet around them, with guests pretending to continue their conversations while straining to hear what would happen next. Mrs. Wellington stood there with her satisfied smile, confident that she had put the fishmonger in his place. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. David's face was red with anger at his mother's behavior, but something strange was happening inside Marcus. Instead of shame or anger, he felt something he had not experienced in years, a kind of calm certainty. Mrs. Wellington thought she knew who he was because of what he did for work. She thought she could judge his worth by the smell on his clothes and the roughness of his hands. She had no idea who he really was, what he had given up, what he was capable of. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Wellington," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed room. "A person should not have to choose work that limits their other possibilities." Mrs. Wellington looked pleased that he was agreeing with her. "Exactly. There are so many opportunities for people who apply themselves properly." "The thing is," Marcus continued, his eyes moving around the circle of guests, "sometimes life makes choices for you. Sometimes you have to give up what you want to take care of what you need." "Well, of course, but surely a man with ambition finds a way to better himself," Mrs. Wellington said, her voice getting louder. "I mean, working with fish for 12 years, one would think you'd want to improve your situation." More guests were gathering now, drawn by the tension. Marcus could see phones coming out, people getting ready to record whatever drama was about to unfold. Sarah grabbed David's arm, whispering urgently in his ear. David was trying to signal his mother to stop, but Mrs. Wellington was too caught up in her performance to notice. "You raise an interesting point about ambition," Marcus said, his voice still calm. "Tell me, Mrs. Wellington, what do you think makes someone qualified to judge another person's choices?" Mrs. Wellington blinked, not expecting the question. "I beg your pardon?" "I'm curious about your background," Marcus said. "What work have you done? What sacrifices have you made? What qualifies you to decide who belongs in civilized society and who doesn't?" The room was completely silent now. Everyone was watching this polite confrontation between the society lady and the fishmonger. Mrs. Wellington's face was starting to turn red. She was not used to being questioned, especially not by someone she considered beneath her station. "Hardly think my background is relevant," she said stiffly. "The point is that some people have standards and some people work 14-hour days to put food on their family's table," Marcus interrupted gently. "Some people get up at 4 in the morning every day for 12 years without missing a single day. Some people sacrifice their own dreams so their children can have better lives." "That's very admirable, I'm sure," Mrs. Wellington said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But surely you understand that there are certain expectations when one moves in better circles." "Better circles," Marcus repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "I see. And what makes your circle better than mine, Mrs. Wellington?" Mrs. Wellington looked around the room, gesturing at the luxury surrounding them. "I should think that would be obvious. Education, refinement, culture. The finer things in life that separate civilization from fish markets." "Ah, culture," Marcus said, and something in his tone made Sarah look at him sharply. "You mean like music?" "Among other things, yes, music, art, literature, things that require education and sensitivity to appreciate properly." Mrs. Wellington was digging herself deeper with every word, but she seemed unable to stop. The crowd around them had grown larger, and she was playing to her audience now, enjoying the chance to demonstrate her superiority over this working-class man who had dared to challenge her. "Take that piano, for example," she continued, pointing to the beautiful grand piano that sat in the corner of the ballroom. "I suppose someone like you has never even seen an instrument of that quality. It's a Steinway, worth more than most people make in several years. It requires a trained musician to truly appreciate its capabilities." Marcus followed her gaze to the piano. It was indeed beautiful. its black surface gleaming under the chandeliers. He had not noticed it when he first entered the ballroom, but now it drew his attention like a magnet. It had been so long since he had seen a piano like that. So long, since he had touched keys that were properly maintained and tuned by experts. "You're right," Marcus said quietly. "It is a beautiful instrument." Mrs. Wellington smiled triumphantly. "Of course, I don't expect someone in your situation to understand the finer points of classical music. It takes years of proper education to develop that kind of appreciation." "What kind of music do you enjoy, Mrs. Wellington?" Marcus asked. "I'm particularly fond of Chopin," she said proudly. "And Rachmaninoff, of course, though I suppose those names mean nothing to you." Marcus felt something stirring inside him, something that had been sleeping for 23 years. "Chopin is beautiful," he said. "The nocturnes especially, though I've always found his ballads more emotionally complex." Mrs. Wellington looked, surprised that he knew the names. "Yes, well, I suppose anyone can read about classical music online these days. The thing about Chopin," Marcus continued, his voice getting stronger, "is that his music requires more than just technical skill. It requires understanding, pain, loss, experience with sacrifice." "How would you know anything about that?" Mrs. Wellington asked, her tone sharper now. Marcus looked around the circle of faces watching him. Sarah's face was filled with confusion and worry. David looked like he was beginning to understand that there might be more to his future father-in-law than anyone had realized. The other guests were leaning in, drawn by the strange turn the conversation had taken. "Mrs. Wellington," Marcus said, his voice clear and steady, "you seem to think that someone like me couldn't possibly understand culture or refinement or the finer things in life. You seem to think that because I work with my hands, because I smell like fish, because I wear a cheap suit, I must be ignorant of anything beyond my little world." "That's not what Mrs. Wellington started, but Marcus continued. "You're right that I work at a fish market. You're right that I get up at 4 every morning and come home smelling like the ocean. You're right that I've never been to a country club or a charity gala or a place like this hotel." Mrs. Wellington nodded, thinking she had won the argument. "But you're wrong about what that means," Marcus said. "You're wrong about who I am, you're wrong about what I'm capable of, and you're wrong about what qualifies someone to appreciate beautiful things. I hardly think," Mrs. Wellington began. "That piano," Marcus said, pointing to the Steinway, "is indeed a beautiful instrument. Worth about $200,000, if I had to guess. Built in New York, probably within the last 5 years based on the finish. The soundboard is made from Sitka spruce, the keys from ebony and ivory substitute. It's been tuned recently, probably this morning for the party. The room was completely silent now. Everyone was staring at Marcus, wondering how a fishmonger knew so much about expensive pianos. Mrs. Wellington's mouth had fallen open slightly. "How could you possibly know all that?" Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the ballroom. "Mrs. Wellington, would you like to know what I think about your theory that some people just don't belong in civilized society?" What do you mean?" Marcus started walking toward the piano and the crowd parted in front of him like water. Sarah followed, her eyes wide with confusion and something that might have been hope. David was right behind her, and behind him came Mrs. Wellington and all the other guests, drawn by the certainty in Marcus's movement. "I think," Marcus said, reaching the piano and running his rough fingers along its polished edge, "that you have no idea what you're talking about." He pulled out the piano bench and sat down, his work-worn hands hovering over the keys. The room was so quiet that everyone could hear the distant sound of traffic outside, the faint hum of the air conditioning, the rustle of expensive fabric, as people moved closer to see what the fishmonger was planning to do. "Music," Marcus said, looking directly at Mrs. Wellington, "isn't about money or education or social status. Music is about truth. And Mrs. Wellington, you're about to learn some truths you never expected." Marcus's fingers found the keys, and after 23 years of silence, the music began. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major floated through the ballroom like something from another world. Marcus's fingers moved across the keys with impossible grace, each note perfect and clear, and filled with emotion that had been locked away for 23 years. The melody was soft at first, almost whispered, but it carried through the room like it was meant to be heard in this exact place at this exact moment. Every conversation stopped. Every glass was set down. Every phone was lowered. The 50 guests in the ballroom stood frozen, their mouths open, their eyes fixed on the fishmonger who was playing classical music like he had been born to do it. Mrs. Wellington's face had gone completely white. Her hand was pressed to her chest like she was having trouble breathing. The woman who had spent the last hour mocking Marcus for his job and his smell was now watching him play one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire with the skill of a professional musician. Sarah's eyes were filling with tears. In 25 years of life, she had never heard her father play piano. She had never even known he could. All those times growing up when she had asked for music lessons, when she had begged for a piano, when she had wondered why they could not afford the things her friends' families had. Her father had quietly said no, said they could not afford it, said music was not practical, but he had never said he already knew how to play. David stood behind Sarah, his arm around her shoulders, his face showing the same shock as everyone else in the room. The man he had known as his girlfriend's hard-working but simple father was revealing himself to be something completely different, something extraordinary. Marcus lost himself in the music the way he used to during his conservatory days. His hands remembered every fingering, every dynamic marking, every subtle phrase that made Chopin's music so beautiful. The years of fish scales and ice water fell away. The smell and the roughness and the exhaustion disappeared. For these few minutes, he was not a fishmonger. He was a musician, pure and simple. The nocturne built to its climax and then settled into the gentle conclusion that always made Marcus think of falling snow. When the last note faded into silence, the room remained perfectly still. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone was processing what they had just witnessed. Then Marcus did something that shocked them even more. Without pausing, without looking up, he transitioned into Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Not the full concerto, of course, since there was no orchestra, but the piano part, played with a kind of technical brilliance that took decades to develop. This piece was harder than the Chopin, more demanding, more emotional. It required not just technical skill but deep understanding of the music's structure and meaning. Marcus's hands flew across the keys, his fingers finding chords that spanned more than an octave, playing melodies that seemed to require more hands than any one person possessed. The music filled the ballroom with power and beauty that none of these wealthy guests had ever heard live. Most of them had only experienced classical music through recordings or at formal concerts where the musicians were distant figures on a stage. But this was different. This was raw and immediate and personal. This was music played by someone who understood what it meant to sacrifice, to lose, to keep going anyway. Mrs. Wellington had sunk into a nearby chair, her champagne glass forgotten in her lap. The woman who minutes ago had been lecturing about culture and refinement was now face to face with culture and refinement beyond anything she had ever experienced personally. The fishmonger she had mocked was playing music that she could never play, understanding composers she had only pretended to appreciate. Other guests were pulling out their phones again, but this time to record something beautiful instead of something embarrassing. This time to capture a moment they knew they would want to remember forever. Word was already spreading through the hotel. Waiters were stopping their work to listen. Hotel staff were gathering outside the ballroom doors. Even people from other events in the hotel were making their way over to hear the mysterious piano music. Sarah moved closer to the piano, her face wet with tears she did not bother to wipe away. She was seeing her father in a completely new light, understanding for the first time the depth of his sacrifice. All those years when she had wished for a different father, a father with a clean job and nice clothes and no smell of fish. All those years when she had been slightly embarrassed by his work. She had never known that he had given up something like this. The Rachmaninoff was reaching its most difficult passage now, a section that required both hands to work independently at incredible speed. Marcus's left hand played a thundering bass line while his right hand danced through a melody that seemed to float above the rest of the music. His face was completely focused, lost in the complexity and beauty of what he was creating. People in the crowd were beginning to recognize just how skilled this performance was. A few of them had taken piano lessons as children or studied music in college. They understood enough to know that what they were hearing was not amateur playing. This was professional level, conservatory level, the kind of playing that took a lifetime to develop. "My God," whispered one of David's college friends. "How is he doing that?" "Where did he learn to play like that?" asked another. But no one had answers. Sarah was as shocked as everyone else. Even Linda, Marcus's wife, had never heard him play. The piano had been a secret he had kept buried so deep that even his own family did not know it existed. Marcus transitioned into the final movement of the concerto, the part where the orchestra would normally join in with full power. But even without the orchestra, even playing alone, the music was overwhelming. It filled every corner of the ballroom, seemed to make the chandeliers vibrate with its intensity. A man near the back of the crowd was crying openly. He was older, maybe 70, and he was dressed better than anyone else in the room. Someone whispered that he was Harrison Vale, the famous classical music critic who wrote for the city newspaper. He had reviewed concerts by the world's greatest pianists, and now he was listening to a fishmonger play Rachmaninoff in a hotel ballroom, and he was moved to tears. The music built to its final climax, Marcus's hands moving so fast they were almost a blur. The piano sang under his touch, every note crystal clear despite the incredible speed and complexity. This was the passage that separated amateur pianists from professionals, the moment when years of training either paid off or fell apart. Marcus played it flawlessly. When the last notes died away, the silence in the ballroom was profound. No one moved. No one breathed. Everyone was trying to process what they had just witnessed. A man they had dismissed as simple and crude had just performed one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire with skill that most professional pianists would envy. Slowly, Harrison Vale began to clap. Just a few quiet claps at first, but then faster and louder. One by one, the other guests joined in. The applause built like a wave, growing stronger and more enthusiastic until the entire ballroom was thundering with appreciation. Marcus sat at the piano, his hands still on the keys, breathing hard from the physical exertion of the performance. He looked up and saw faces he did not recognize. The polite but distant expressions were gone, replaced by wonder and respect, and something close to awe. Mrs. Wellington was still sitting in her chair, staring at Marcus like she was seeing a ghost. The woman who had spent the evening lecturing about culture and refinement was now confronted with the reality that she had been talking to someone who understood both far better than she ever would. Sarah pushed through the crowd and through her, arms around her father, not caring about her dress or her makeup or what anyone thought. "Dad," she whispered, "why didn't you ever tell me?" Marcus held his daughter close, smelling her perfume and feeling how small she still was in his arms. "There was no point, sweetheart. That life was over. This life was what mattered." "But you could have been," Sarah started. "I could have been a lot of things," Marcus said quietly. "But then I wouldn't have been your father, and that's the only thing I've ever wanted to be." The applause was finally dying down, but people were still crowding around the piano. Harrison Vale had made his way to the front, his old eyes bright with excitement. "Sir," he said, extending his hand to Marcus. "Harrison Vale, music critic, for the Times. That was extraordinary. Where did you study?" Marcus stood up from the piano bench, suddenly aware again of his cheap suit and his rough hands and the faint smell of fish that still clung to him. But somehow it mattered less now. "The conservatory," he said simply. "A long time ago." "You were a performance major?" "For 3 years. Then my family needed me." Harrison Vale nodded slowly, understanding passing across his face. He had seen enough talented musicians over the years to know that not all of them got to finish their journey. "Your technique is remarkable. That Rachmaninoff, I've heard it performed by some of the world's best pianists. And your interpretation was as good as any of them." Mrs. Wellington finally found her voice. She stood up from her chair and walked slowly toward Marcus, her face pale and confused. The woman who had been so confident in her superiority just minutes before now looked lost and small. 3 days after the engagement party, Marcus was back at the fish market before dawn, sorting through the morning catch. His hands moved with the same practiced skill they always had, but something was different. The other workers kept looking at him strangely, and customers who had never paid him much attention were suddenly very interested in talking to him. "Marcus, is it true what I heard about you playing piano?" asked Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who had been buying fish from him for years. Word had spread fast. Harrison Vale had written a column in the Tuesday newspaper about the extraordinary musical discovery at a hotel engagement party. He had not used Marcus's name, calling him only a working man whose hidden talents remind us that genius can be found anywhere. But enough people had been at the party that Marcus's identity was becoming known. "I used to play a little," Marcus said, wrapping Mrs. Patterson's salmon. "A little?" She laughed. "My grandson was working at the hotel that night. He said people were crying. He said it was the most beautiful music he'd ever heard." Marcus just smiled and took her money. He was grateful that Mrs. Patterson was not making a big deal about it, not treating him differently because of what had happened. But not everyone was being so understanding. Tony, the dock supervisor, had been acting strange all morning. He kept walking past Marcus's station, looking at him like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Finally, around 10 o'clock, Tony pulled Marcus aside. "We need to talk," Tony said, leading Marcus away from the other workers. "I've been hearing some crazy stories about you." Marcus's heart sank. He had been afraid this might happen. "What kind of stories?" "Stories about you playing piano at some fancy party. Stories about you being some kind of music genius. Stories that don't make sense with the Marcus Chen I know." Tony, "No, let me finish," Tony said, his voice getting louder. "I've been working with you for 8 years. I thought I knew you, but if these stories are true, if you really can play like they're saying, then what the hell are you doing here?" Marcus looked around the fish market, at the ice bins and the scales and the smell that had been his world for so long. "This is my job, Tony. This is where I belong." "That's bullshit and you know it," Tony said angrily. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know what it means if you can really play classical music like a professional? It means you had choices. It means you could have done something better than this. Tony, it's not that simple. Don't give me that. You want to know what I think? I think you've been slumming. I think you've been playing some kind of game pretending to be one of us when really you're something else." Marcus felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Tony's words hurt more than anything Mrs. Wellington had said at the party. Mrs. Wellington was a stranger who did not know him. But Tony was a friend, someone he had worked beside for years, someone whose opinion mattered. "That's not true," Marcus said quietly. "I work here because I need to work here. My family needed the money." "Your family needed the money 20 years. Go," Tony shot back. "What about now? What about all the years in between? You telling me you couldn't have found something better if you'd tried?" Marcus did not know how to answer that question. The truth was complicated. Yes, there might have been other opportunities over the years. There might have been ways to use his musical knowledge, ways to make more money doing something closer to what he loved. But those opportunities would have required taking risks, leaving the security of steady work, possibly moving the family or changing everything about their lives. "I made a choice, Tony. I chose stability over dreams." "You chose to lie to all of us," Tony said. "You chose to let us think you were just like us when really you're better than us." "I'm not better than anyone," Marcus said firmly. "I work the same hours you do. I do the same job, I get the same pay. But you didn't have to," Tony said. "That's the difference. All of us here, we do this work because it's what we can do. It's the best we can manage, but you chose this. You chose to be here when you could have been somewhere else." Other workers were starting to notice the argument. Jimmy, the young man who often asked Marcus for advice, was watching with a confused expression. Maria, who worked the shrimp counter, had stopped serving customers to listen. "Does it matter why I'm here?" Marcus asked. "Does it matter as long as I do good work?" "Yeah, it matters," Tony said. "It matters because it means everything about you has been a lie. It means when we've been complaining about our lives, about being stuck in jobs like this, you've been sitting there knowing you could leave anytime you wanted." "I couldn't leave," Marcus said. My family, your family would have been fine, Tony interrupted. Sarah's grown up now. She's got a good job. Your wife's been working steady for years. You could have done something else any time in the last 5 years, but you didn't. You stayed here pretending to be something you're not. Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. He had never thought about it the way Tony was describing it, but he could see how it might look to the other workers. How it might seem like he had been playing a role, pretending to be one of them when he had options they did not have. I stayed because this is honest work, Marcus said. Because I'm good at it. Because it matters. Save it, Tony said. I don't want to hear any more lies. Tony walked away, leaving Marcus standing alone by the ice bins. The other workers were still watching, and Marcus could see questions in their eyes. Questions about who he really was, why he was really there, whether anything they thought they knew about him was true. Marcus went back to work, but the day felt different now. Customers who used to chat with him were more formal, more distant. Some seemed impressed by the stories they had heard, treating him with a new kind of respect that felt uncomfortable. Others seemed suspicious, like they were wondering what other secrets he might be hiding. Around noon, a man in an expensive suit came to Marcus's counter. He was young, maybe 35, with the kind of confidence that came from success and money. "Are you Marcus Chen?" the man asked. "Yes. I'm Robert Kessler from the Meridian Restaurant Group. We own 12 upscale restaurants in the city. I heard about your performance the other night." Marcus continued sorting fish, not looking up. "What can I help you with, Mr. Kessler? Have a proposition for you. We're opening a new restaurant next month, very high-end, very exclusive. We want to have live piano music in the evenings. Not just background music, but real performances. Classical jazz, maybe some contemporary pieces arranged for piano." Marcus finally looked up. "I'm not interested. You haven't heard the offer. Yet. $50,000 a year, part-time. 4 evenings a week, 3 hours each night. You'd be playing for people who really appreciate good music. People who understand what they're hearing." It was more money than Marcus made at the fish market. For fewer hours of work, it was a chance to use his musical training, to play for appreciative audiences, to be valued for something other than his ability to tell fresh fish from old fish. "I already have a job," Marcus said. "Mr. Chen, with respect, you're wasting your talent here. You could be doing something meaningful, something that uses your gifts." "This work is meaningful," Marcus said. "I feed families. I help local fishermen make a living. I provide good food at fair prices." Mr. Kessler looked around the fish market with barely concealed distaste. "But surely you want more than this? Surely you want to use the abilities you've spent years developing." "I use my abilities every day," Marcus said. "Just different ones." "Look, I'll give you my card," Mr. Kessler said, placing it on the counter. "Think about it. Talk to your family. This could change your life." After Mr. Kessler left, Marcus stared at the business card for a long time. $50,000 a year. Playing piano for people who appreciated music, using skills that had been dormant for over 2 decades. It was tempting in a way that surprised him. That evening, Marcus told Linda and Sarah about the job offer. They were sitting around the small kitchen table eating dinner and talking about their days. It felt normal and comfortable, the way family dinners should feel. $50,000? Linda said, her eyes wide. "Marcus, that's almost twice what you make now." "And you'd be playing music again," Sarah added. "Dad, this could be amazing for you." Marcus pushed his food around on his plate. "It would mean evenings. 4 nights a week I'd be working when you two are home." "We'd manage," Linda said quickly. "Marcus, this is an opportunity. You can't pass this up." "Why not? I've been passing up opportunities for 23 years. "That was different," Sarah said. "That was when I was young, when we really needed the steady income. Now things are different. Now you could take a chance. What if I'm not as good as I used to be? What if people expect more than I can deliver?" "Dad," Sarah said gently, "I was there the other night. Everyone was there. You were incredible. You haven't lost anything." Marcus thought about Tony's words, about being accused of lying to his co-workers. of pretending to be something he was not. Maybe Tony was right. Maybe staying at the fish market for all these years had been a kind of lie, a way of avoiding the risks and challenges that came with pursuing dreams. I need to think about it, Marcus said finally. Marcus arrived at work the next morning with a different feeling in his chest. The familiar pre-dawn routine felt strange now, like he was watching someone else's life instead of living his own. He sorted fish and served customers and talked with the other workers, but part of his mind was somewhere else, thinking about piano keys and restaurant stages and the choice he had made during his sleepless night. Around 10 o'clock, he found Tony checking inventory near the loading dock. The other man looked up when Marcus approached, his expression still cool from their argument the day before. "Tony, I need to talk to you," Marcus said. "If this is about yesterday," I said what I needed to say. "It's not about yesterday." "Well, not exactly." Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice." Tony stared at him for a long moment. "You're quitting?" "I got a job offer, playing piano at a restaurant. Good money, regular hours. I think it's time I made a change." Tony's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, disappointment, and something that might have been vindication. "So you are leaving us behind, just like I said you would." "That's not what this is about, Tony." "Sure it is. Now that your secret's out, now that people know you're too good for this place, you're moving on to something better. Something more suited to your talents." Marcus felt the familiar frustration rising in his chest. "Tony, I've worked here for 12 years. I've never missed a day. I've never complained about the work or the hours or the pay. I've been a good employee and a good coworker, until now. I'm not leaving because I think I'm better than this work. I'm leaving because maybe it's time to stop being afraid of who I used to be." Tony was quiet for a moment, processing this. "What do you mean?" Marcus looked around the fish market at the world that had been his home for so long. "For 23 years I've been running away from music. I told myself it was because my family needed me, because this work was more practical, because dreams don't pay bills. And all of that was true at first. But somewhere along the way I stopped running away from music and started running away from failure. I stayed here because it was safe, because I knew I was good at this job, because I was afraid that if I tried to be a musician again I might not be good enough." Tony crossed his arms. "And now you think you are good enough?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "Maybe I am, maybe I'm not, but I'm finally ready to find out." Tony was quiet for a long time, looking out at the harbor where the fishing boats were bringing in their morning catch. "You know what pisses me off most about this whole thing?" he said finally. "What?" "It's not that you're leaving. It's not even that you had this whole other life we didn't know about. It's that you make it look so easy." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean you just decide you want to be something else and boom, there's a job offer waiting for you. You just decide you want to change your life and you can do it. The rest of us, we don't get those kinds of choices." Marcus understood now. Tony wasn't really angry about the lying or the secrets. He was angry about the options, about the fact that Marcus could walk away from this life while Tony and the others were stuck in it. "Tony, you could make changes too if you wanted. You're smart, you work hard." "Don't," Tony said sharply. "Don't try to make this about me not trying hard enough or not wanting it badly enough. We both know it doesn't work that way for most people." Marcus nodded. Tony was right. Not everyone got lucky breaks or second chances or job offers that fell from the sky. Most people worked jobs like this because they had to, because it was what they could get, because the world didn't offer them alternatives. "You're right," Marcus said. "I've been lucky. Luckier than I deserved." "Yeah, well." Tony shrugged. "I guess I can't blame you for taking advantage of it. I just wish—" He trailed off. "What?" "I just wish it didn't feel like you were abandoning us. Like now that you remember you're somebody special. Us regular folks aren't good enough for you anymore." Marcus felt a stab of pain at Tony's words. "That's not how I feel, Tony. It's not how I'll ever feel. This place, these people, this work, it's been my life for 12 years. It made me who I am. But not who you're going to be. No, Marcus admitted. Not who I'm going to be. They stood in silence for a while, watching the controlled chaos of the morning fish market. Workers moving between the ice bins, customers examining the day's catch, trucks backing up to deliver fresh loads from the overnight boats. It was a good life, Marcus realized. An honest life. He had never been ashamed of it, not really, and he wasn't ashamed of it now. When do you start the new job? Tony asked. 2 weeks from Monday. I wanted to make sure all my regular customers know I'm leaving. Make sure everything's covered properly. That's good of you. Tony paused. And, Marcus, yeah? I hope it works out, I really do. I may be pissed off about how it happened, but I hope you make it. Marcus felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Thanks, Tony. That means a lot. The next 2 weeks passed quickly. Marcus told his regular customers about his career change, and most of them were supportive, even excited for him. Mrs. Patterson brought him a good luck card signed by her whole family. The restaurant owners he supplied asked him to recommend someone to take over his accounts. Even some of the younger workers who had been suspicious at first came around to wishing him well. On his last day, the market workers threw him a small party after closing time. Nothing fancy, just pizza and beer and a cake that Linda had made. But it meant everything to Marcus. These people had been his friends and colleagues for 12 years. They had shared early morning coffee and lunch breaks and complaints about difficult customers. They had been his second family. Jimmy, the young worker who often asked Marcus for advice, raised his beer bottle in a toast. To Marcus, he said, who taught us that you never know what someone's really capable of until they get the chance to show you. Everyone drank to that, even Tony, who had been quiet for most of the party. The following Monday evening, Marcus put on his one-good suit and walked into Meridian, the upscale restaurant where he would be playing piano 4 nights a week. The Setti dining room was elegant but not stuffy. With soft lighting and tables spaced far enough apart for intimate conversation, the piano was a beautiful baby grand. Not as impressive as the Steinway at the hotel, but well-maintained and perfectly tuned. Robert Kessler introduced Marcus to the staff and explained that the music would be background mostly, classical pieces, and jazz standards that would complement the dining experience without overwhelming it. Nothing too loud or dramatic. Nothing that would interfere with conversation. Marcus sat down at the piano and began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, letting the familiar melody settle into the restaurant's atmosphere. A few diners looked up and smiled. Others continued their conversations, but Marcus could see them relaxing, their shoulders dropping as the music washed over them. This was different from playing at the engagement party. That had been about proving a point, about revealing a hidden truth. This was about service, about creating something beautiful for people to enjoy while they shared meals and celebrated special occasions. Over the next few weeks, Marcus settled into his new routine. 4 evenings a week at the restaurant, the other 3 at home with Linda and Sarah. No more 4 o'clock mornings, no more fish smell, no more aching back from lifting heavy boxes of ice. Instead, he spent his days practicing piano, relearning pieces he had not played in decades, exploring new music he had never had time to study. Word spread about the talented pianist at Meridian. Restaurant reviews mentioned the extraordinary live music and the skilled musician who brings classical elegance to the dining experience. Customers started requesting specific pieces, and some came to the restaurant specifically to hear Marcus play. One evening, about a month after he started the job, Marcus looked up from the piano to see a familiar face at one of the corner tables. Harrison Vale, the music critic, was dining with a woman Marcus didn't recognize. Vale caught his eye and nodded approvingly. After his set, Marcus walked over to Vale's table. "Mr. Chen," Vale said, standing to shake hands. "I hoped I might find you here. I've been hearing wonderful things about your performances." "Thank you," Marcus said. "It's good to see you again. This is my wife, Margaret," Vale said, gesturing to his dinner companion. "She's been wanting to hear you play ever since I told her about the engagement party." Margaret smiled warmly. Harrison said you were extraordinary, but I had to hear for myself. He was right. Your Chopin tonight was beautiful. Thank you. That means a lot coming from both of you. Vale leaned forward. Marcus, I have a proposition for you. The City Symphony is doing a benefit concert next month, raising money for music, education programs in the schools. They need a piano soloist for one piece. Would you be interested? Marcus felt his heart rate increase. Playing in a restaurant was one thing. The music was background, secondary to the dining experience. But playing with a symphony, being the featured soloist, that was something entirely different. That was the kind of performance he had dreamed about as a young conservatory student. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that, Marcus said. The piece is Grieg's Piano Concerto in a minor, Vale continued. Challenging, but I think well within your abilities.